Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And the first word I want to say is sorry. Yes, 4 weeks ago when I gave a press conference, I offended a number of people talking about SEND. We never stop learning in life, and what that told us is that everybody is unhappy, frustrated, angry, furious about what is going on within the SEND system. Parents feel that they are battling, they are fighting a system that doesn't work for their children. And we have to talk about difficult issues, challenging issues, in a way that sometimes is uncomfortable. Because if we're not prepared to do that, we'll never make progress, we'll never overcome problems. But amongst all of the emails that I got was some remarkably helpful suggestions, including from young people who actually were also cross. They were cross with their own parents who had, in a sense, had them labelled in the SEN system. And they felt that sort of disadvantaged them at school. So they were unhappy too. And just recently, we have seen that GPs are now admitting that there is an issue with the overdiagnosis of mental health and neurodiverse issues. The Health Secretary a few months ago, he talked about it, but he recognises how difficult it is to address these issues. But what it shows is that at every single level, the SEND system is broken, and we at Reform are determined to be at the heart of reforming it and improving it. Not only because, of course, it affects the councils that we're currently running and more councils that we hope to run, but much, much more importantly, because without proper reform, it's the children who don't get the better outcomes and the extra provision that they need. In particular, those most in need, most deserving. And I've got my own personal experience from dear friends who had not one but two disabled children, severely disabled, who had to constantly battle the system. And within my own extended family, I've seen the system not working, but also I've seen overdiagnosis. And I know that upsets some of the big important charities in this space. I think we can do better than shout at each other. I think we can work constructively together, because imagine the optimistic scenario. Imagine that we didn't call children disabled, but we learned from other nations where people are called differently abled. Yes, every young person has ability, has talent. We have to find it, nurture it, motivate it, infuse it. And that way, the young people are the beneficiaries. Imagine a system where children don't have to travel in a taxi every day 60 to 90 minutes to a specialist school. Imagine having a specialist school in rural areas within 2 or 3 villages away. Imagine, for example, using redundant churches 5 days a week that are currently only used 1 day a week. I've literally seen it with my own eyes, how successful that can be. School in the north of England, renting a church 5 days a week. Imagine specialist schools for differently abled children, using those churches, reopening churches that have indeed been made redundant. What a great thing that would be for the Church of England to show real leadership. Imagine these possibilities that we can have. Imagine parents not feeling they have to fight the system, not feeling that they have to engage lawyers in order to get EHCPs. And imagine when you get an EHCP for your child, well, what's the point of it if it just then sits on the shelf until next year's update, but the provision that you fought for then doesn't get delivered because the psychologists and the therapists haven't got time to deliver the provision because they're working too hard providing other EHCPs. Imagine more teachers, specialist trained teachers, in those small specialist schools in many more areas, as opposed to 50 miles away or more. Imagine spending less money and getting better outcomes. It is absolutely doable. It is absolutely possible. And I suspect that almost every parent would prefer not to be arguing with councils, but to be talking collaboratively, constructively with teachers in their schools, local specialist school, local mainstream school, saying, how can we help? How can we get better provision? And as part of this, I've been talking to many parents with SEN children and also heads of mainstream schools with adjacent specialist units and also heads of specialist schools. I believe that is the ambition that we should aspire to, that reform is determined to aim for. Is it easy? No. Will it happen overnight? No. Is it worth absolutely trying to have these difficult conversations and to reform the system? You bet, because it's the children that benefit the most. Now, there are some strange things going on within this whole sector. For example, many may not know that there are now some over 30,000 places, independent specialist places, that are for profit, that are now funded by private equity groups who see this as one of the big growth areas, turning over some 2 billion plus, growing at 10% a year, making incredibly healthy margins, 300 to 400 million pounds of profit in the specialist sector alone. Hang on, so we've got a socialist government that wants to tax charitable schools, providing great education, but that are seemingly quite happy to scrap more specialist state-sponsored schools and have more private equity-owned specialist schools charging 3 times the price, charging more than Eton. Something's not quite right here. Doesn't compute. Doesn't seem sensible. What about the opportunity, for example, for some of these specialist charities working in this particular space, that actually they were to set up and run many more specialist schools in the same way that independent schools are charities? That could be a great way forward. There's about 100 new specialist schools set up every year, all of them private equity funded, almost without exception. I think we can do things differently. And to those who say, where's your evidence, Richard, about all of this? Well, this 50-page report from the County Council Network, produced just a few weeks ago, I would urge everybody to read it. It's really, really important. How we got to the crisis point and why we need reform of the system. Well, that is absolutely the issue. SEND this year costing taxpayers some £12 billion, and yet that report shows that outcomes are no better than about a decade ago. And in many cases, for the children most in need, the outcomes are worse. How is that possible? Of the growth in EHCP's, educational health and care plans, in the last decade, some 88% are related to neurodiverse issues. In the last year alone, EHCPs for speech language is up some 18%. Are we really getting this right? What we have, folks, is a system that is completely broken. The SEND system is broken in Britain, and Reform are determined to fix it. And that's why I'm announcing today that we are setting up a SEND working group to be chaired by Dame Andrea Jenkins, who has considerable professional and personal experience in this sector. And there will be a number of members of this working group, Reform councillors, Natalie Oliver from Lincolnshire, Beverly Fordham from Kent, along with experts who are currently working in the profession and who therefore, for reasons that I hope will remain obvious, must remain anonymous. And you sort of think, well, why? And that comes back to this issue of, well, some people are afraid, and we mustn't be afraid. We must actually be bold and embrace this. And the plan for this working group is they'll be working through all of 2026, but to produce its first interim report in the first quarter of next year, probably just before or alongside the government's planned white paper that, of course, as we all know, has been delayed for much of this year. And I think it's vital that we work constructively on this. We're quite happy to work on a cross-party basis. We're quite happy to work on a trial basis to look at different ways of doing things in individual councils. Because we've got to be constructive about this. We've got to be determined to do things better. We're not going to be silenced on it. We want to embrace it. We want to encourage discussion. We want to infuse it. And I'll leave you with this important point. Nobody's disabled. People are differently abled. That is the opportunity. That's what we're determined to do. We have to do things better. SEND needs reform. Thank you. Now, we've got some questions from our good friends in the media, starting with, let's go to Chris Hope at GB News.
Chris Hope, GB News, Mr. Tice. Just quick questions then. So you want to get profit-making out of SEND provision. That sounds quite a left-wing policy for a party seen as a right-wing party. Are we seeing that right? What's wrong with making profit? Even if you find it distasteful, companies can make money, can't they? And very quickly about the BBC situation. Is it right that licence fee payers' money should pay for BBC mistakes? What's your message to Donald Trump?
Yeah, look,
you made your point, back off. And just very finally, the Chagos Islands have formed an exile government with interim Prime Minister. Will you recognise it if it become a government in 2029?
So, on the first point, I didn't say we don't like profit. We like profit. Profit is a good thing. It's just ironic that we've got a government that is cancelling state-funded, state-sponsored specialist schools whilst encouraging 80 to 100 new private equity-funded schools. That just seems a bit ironic when they've actually made life harder for the independent charitable sector that was doing so well. And by the way, the impact of the VAT on independent school fees means that tens of thousands of parents are now seeking EHCPs. That's now costing the government, I estimate, possibly as much as 200 million a year. Bearing in mind they were trying to raise over $1 billion a year. I mean, the unintended consequences of flawed government policy. So profit making is a good thing, but there might be different ways of doing it. You could have councils doing joint ventures with brilliant providers. I just think we've got to look at all options, but from what I'm hearing at the moment, we've got a situation where we've got a crisis of a shortage of specialist places, and you've got councils cancelling new schools, and it just feels wrong, and I think we've got to talk about it. On the second point, with regard to the BBC, well, as we say, not only does SEND need reform, but the BBC needs reform. Lock, stock and barrel. I suspect that change is coming. The third point was regard to Chagos. Sorry, have I missed some breaking news? Has the government withdrawn their Chagos absurd bill? Well, I think we're happy to look at anything. I mean, we've said quite frankly we would rip up this dreadful Chagos deal, and so let's look at things. It's a very important space, and we all wonder why this government is determined to send so much of our money, tens of billions of pounds, to Mauritius to pay away to give away a very, very valuable freehold. Ian Watson of the BBC.
Okay, a couple of questions. First of all, on SEND, your tone has changed since the last time you talked about this. You talked about parents hijacking the system and so on, and you seem to be willing to cooperate and consult. But in terms of substance, I'm interested in what's changed.
In terms of the
substance, what has actually changed? When it comes to specialist schools, if there's going to be more of them, are you advocating taking kids out of mainstream education, or is it for people who would already be in specialist schools? And secondly, on the question of overdiagnosis, are there whole conditions that you think should not be getting the kind of support they get now, for example, kids with ADHD. The second topic is probably quite predictable. You said we shouldn't shy away from talking about things which are uncomfortable. So in that spirit, on the BBC, just to be clear, obviously they're opening a charter negotiations today, but a government minister this morning said the BBC should stand firm in the face of Donald Trump's lawsuit. What's your advice?
So look, on SEND and the substance and the tone, yes, it's all important, and we're prepared to talk about difficult issues. I'm not going to stand here and prejudge anything that the working group is going to look into. It's going to look at everything. And with a range of experts, both current and former, that's the job of the working group, and it's really important. The key message from today is that reform is determined to help ensure that this system changes for the better. And if we can accelerate that before a next general election by trying things in councils that we're allowed to do on a cross-party basis or whatever, we should encourage all of it. Because, in a sense, it's the lesson to learn from this is how frustrated everybody is. The children are frustrated, the parents are frustrated, teachers are frustrated, and councils are going bankrupt. It's as simple as that. So it's right that we dig in great detail, and in a sense it's just a reflection of what we're doing in many other areas. You may have heard me speak at Bloomberg recently, so there's a lot going on. It's what you would expect from a party that plans to form the next government. With regard to the BBC, well, who knows? Who knows where that all goes? But the charter negotiations is an opportunity, isn't it, to relook at everything in the same way we're relooking at SEND. And it's an opportunity for the BBC itself to continuously improve. Shall I leave it at that? In that optimistic, imaginary way. Mara Aurora, Sky News.
Thank you. First of all, just on SEND. So, in the spirit of transparency, you said spending less money and getting better outcomes is your mission. So, just to be clear, is that meaning cuts to the SEND budget?
I said imagine that, because actually what we're seeing in many areas of public life, just pouring more money at something doesn't guarantee that it's going to get better. And in a sense, if you can, I know the media like to talk about sort of, cuts means worse. Actually, efficiencies, customer service, better outcomes, better way to deliver things. Are you sure you want the private sector to charge more than Eton for a school place when actually the council could rent a church, use it 5 days a week, spend less money and still get great outcomes with fantastic teachers? And I know people will say, well, where are the teachers coming from? Well, actually, you've got, with AI, you've got concerns about some people in some sectors losing jobs, but actually teaching in specialist schools is it's an incredibly important personal touch that I saw very deeply just last Friday. And the opportunity for people to be retrained, reskilled throughout life, I think that's one of the real opportunities. So I think you can spend money more wisely, more effectively, with better outcomes, is how I would leave it.
Thank you. Just on a different topic, if I may. One of your colleagues, Chris Parry, the mayoral candidate for Hampshire and Solent, obviously been delayed now, he said that David Lammy should go back to the Caribbean, back home to the Caribbean. Do you support that language, and do you support what he was trying to say, purely because yesterday Danny Kruger appeared to support or even maybe defend?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what was said. At the end of the day, David Lammy is he's a cabinet minister. Whether we think he's doing a good job or a bad job is just part of politics. That's day-to-day life. And he will, I'm sure, continue to claim he's doing a great job. We challenge him, and in our view, this government, a number of its cabinet members, they've got no experience of business, no experience how to grow the economy, whether it's David Lammy or the Chancellor. And we've seen the numbers today. Just look at the jobs numbers going down once again. All of the economic numbers, all of the growth numbers are going in the wrong direction, and that is what we're going to hold this government to account on. Carl from ITV.
Thank you very much. You described the use of taxpayers' money to fund private equity-backed special schools as ironic under a Labour government, but I'm not entirely clear on whether you think it's a good or a bad thing. Do you regard it as something that you would like to see stop under a reform government? And in a similar vein, is it right or wrong of Donald Trump to potentially cost licence fee payers a great deal of their money by suing the BBC?
With regard to the private, the first thing is to be aware of it. I don't think most people are aware of the scale of the private equity funded specialist school model. Now, if they are producing outcomes 3 times as good as anybody else, people might say that's great, fantastic, we want more of it. But if the outcomes are the same as state-sponsored schools, you're saying, well, are we getting value for money? Now, look, competition's a good thing. So, but what I think the first thing is to do is to raise it, and then to say, is this the right way? Have we got? And if there's almost no state-sponsored schools being set up, or the government's actually reducing them, and the private equity market thinks that this is money for old rope from a monopolistic growing supplier, then I think we've got to ask that question. That's for the working group. Relook at the data. It's all initially in the CCN report, but I think people do need to know why the bills are going up so much, and it just feels to me there might be different ways of doing it. We might be able to spend that money better, smarter. You know, in a sense, it's the sort of area where joint ventures might be really an interesting way to look at it, as long as we're getting better outcomes. And when you read report after report, whether it's from the CCN or whether it's from the Association of Directors of Children's Services, that say that outcomes are not improving, and yet the cost of it is going like that, you're saying, hang on, what's going on? And that's why. With regard to the President and the BBC, look, I think he's making a serious point, which is that he's pretty grumpy about what happened, and not unreasonably. Where it ends up, who knows? What we know is that the BBC needs reform. Martin Beckford at the Daily Mail.
Thank you. When we were here last month, you said that you expected most of Reform's councils would increase council tax by give or take the rate of inflation. Worcestershire Council, as I'm sure you know, has applied for permission to increase it by up to 10%, but the Deputy Leader said his plans were based on a 5% rise, which is still more than inflation. Do you still think Reform councils will be able to keep council tax rises below 5%? Thank you.
Yeah, look, Worcestershire has always been identified as one with particular significant challenges. But look, I stand by the other observations, which is that we're working towards inflation-linked rises. One of the big issues that I've touched on before is, of course, around the local government pension schemes and pensions and employer contributions, which is a significant element within this. And I have to say that I think it is absolutely outrageous that Section 151 officers, the equivalent of a finance director, is essentially trying to bully and force elected councillors to carry out their advice and say that if you don't follow our advice on employer contributions, you lose your indemnity and you might be held personally liable. I think that's outrageous. What's the point of elected representatives if they're not allowed to apply any judgment based on their own experience? And what we are seeing is a level of overprudence laid on overprudence, laid on overprudent actuarial evaluations in the LGPS, which means that actually it is forcing council bills higher than they otherwise need to be. So we're looking in great detail at this. It can make a significant difference to the council tax increases, and I just gently say to council officers, at the end of the day, advisors advise, and directors decide, councillors decide, ministers decide. That's how it should work in a democracy. So we're constantly working on this. We'll see where it goes. I just reiterate, on the whole local government pension schemes, it's really important. We're not in any way touching anybody's rights or entitlements. But let's manage it properly, let's get the cost down, let's get the employer contributions right, and maybe let's address it annually as opposed to 3 yearly. David Williamson at The Express.
Thank you. What do you think is actually driving the increase in pupils who need to send help? Is there an actual crisis in childhood in Britain today? Is that a legacy of the pandemic? Or is it the fact that we have the first generation which is glued for so much of their lives to screens? And we've seen obviously radical action in Australia. Is that something that you think should be on the cards here? And just on the BBC situation, should the BBC fight the case or settle?
So look, I think what the working group will do is look at the growing body of evidence, and there are people like the ISOS partnership who are producing almost annual reports about what's going on within the SEND system, and they can help significantly in this area, as well as many others. And I think many of those experts appreciate the fact that there is a political party that is willing to talk about it and address it, however hard it is, in as rational and a sensitive way as is possible. And whether it's a combination of all of those things you mentioned, whether it's partly COVID, is it partly children being out of school for a long time, is it partly social media, the impact of phones and screens, combination of all of those things. The experiment in Australia, I'm sure, will be very closely watched all over the world. So yeah, I think, look, the jury's out, but what we do know is we can't just think that you can just keep throwing money at it and that outcomes will get better when the evidence over the last 10 years doesn't show that. And so I think we've got to be prepared to look at things differently. With regard to, you said about the BBC, my answer is the same. The BBC just needs reform. Christopher McKeown from PA.
Thanks. Chris McKeon, PA. On the subject of Chris Parry and David Lammy, you said you hadn't seen or weren't aware of what was said, so it's very short. Let me read it to you. He said, Lammy must go home to the Caribbean where loyalty lies. Presumably he meant his loyalty. Do you think there are any circumstances in which it's acceptable to tell a British-born black man to go home to the Caribbean?
My answer is, thank you. Did you have a second part of your question? Did you want to talk about SEND? That's sort of what we're here to talk about.
I'll ask about SEND. If you want to be clear about what you think about private equity, it seems to be, do you think it should be involved or shouldn't?
So look, on Chris Parry, I've given an answer. With regard to private equity, I think the first thing, as I said, is let's everyone understand the significant role that private equity is now playing in it. If the outcomes are getting better, if the private equity world and those independent schools prove that their outcomes are much, much better, great. We should learn lessons. Should we look at joint ventures? I don't know. What I want is to look at all of these options and to ask the questions that no one seems previously to be asking, let alone provide answers. Why is the government cancelling state-sponsored schools when the private equity world thinks that it's a very profitable business to go in? I'm sort of thinking there might be a middle ground. There might be a better way of doing things to get, following with the previous question, better value for money. That's literally what every council, every politician should be looking to do. Better value for money, better outcomes, in particular for children. And so that's what the working group will look at. I think it's really interesting, and I look forward to sitting down with some of the private equity groups and looking at it and saying, how can we work really well together to ensure that everybody's getting value out of this process, in particular the children. Peter Walker. There you are, Peter. Sorry.
My excellent colleagues have asked such good questions on SEND. You've answered them so well. I'm afraid I've run out of things to say.
Oh,
So
well, thank you very much.
I'm going to ask you on two other things in your role as deputy leader of the party. First of all, on the BBC, polling routinely shows the BBC is the most trusted news organisation in the UK. The British voters generally trust it a lot, whereas they don't particularly like Donald Trump. Do you sometimes worry that you and your colleagues spend a bit too much time on X and have lost touch with what people think on this? And on a second one, when you were on a broadcast round earlier this month, you said that the 25 plus people who've accused Nigel Farage of racist or similar actions when he was at school were making things up. Do you still stand by that?
So, with regard to the BBC, look, some of what the BBC does is incredible. They produce some of the best programmes, documentaries, and the like, but sometimes they get it wrong, badly wrong. And from everything that we're hearing and seeing, and as we win by-elections every single week, sometimes by record margins, it feels to me that that many more people may agree with us that there might be a better way of doing things. And that in the same way people buy Sky subscriptions, Netflix subscriptions, wouldn't it be lovely to have the choice to buy a BBC subscription? Who knows? All of that needs looking at. And with regard to your second question, Peter, it's old news. We covered that a couple of weeks ago. We're moving on. We're dealing with today's news and today's issues around Send and looking forwards. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.